There are over 500 million atheists in the world, and most of them don't understand why people believe in God or even what the best arguments for God's existence are. So in this video, we're going to go over 3 simple ways to prove that God exists. I'm going to give you the tools that you need to argue accurately and articulately with anybody who's an atheist. And at the end, I'll even give you a free material that you can use to defend this teaching with whoever you like. So let's go ahead and dive in here. The first argument that I wanted to touch upon is a proof by what's called efficient cause. So it goes like this. Everything must either be caused or not caused. It's the only 2 options for things that exist. Either they're caused to exist or they're not caused to exist. If everything were caused to exist, there would be nothing to cause the first cause. So if everything is caused, then the first cause necessarily must be caused. But how did the first cause get there? Something had to cause the first cause. Okay, then you go back. Well, what caused that? Well, if everything's caused, then something had to cause that. And then you go back. And well, if everything, you get the idea. So if there were no first cause, there would be no following causes. Therefore, something uncaused must exist. And whatever that uncaused being is, that's what Christians call God, that's what Jews call God, and that's what Muslims call God. So let's walk through that one more time. Everything must be either caused or uncaused. If everything were caused, there would be nothing to cause the first cause. If there were no first cause, there would be no following causes. Therefore, something uncaused must exist. We can see clearly that things are caused and that effects happen. So there has to be a series of causes that's bringing that about. And in order for there to be that series of causes, there has to be something that can cause without being caused. Let's break this down, make it really simple, and I'll give you a few analogies here, 3 analogies that I think are very helpful. So imagine that you're standing in front of some railroad tracks, and you see on the railroad a train. And you look to your left and right, and you see, as far as you can see, there's only cargo cars. Cargo car, cargo car, cargo car, just a long line of cargo cars. You don't see an engine. You don't see anything that would produce motion attached to it. But then all of a sudden, the train starts to move and the cargo cars start to go and to accelerate. Well, even though you look to your left and you look to your right and you don't see an engine, you know that even if there's an infinite amount of cargo cars in both directions, none of those cargo cars can produce motion, and so they can't give motion to any of the following cargo cars. So even though you can't see the engine in the distance because maybe it's around a turn or maybe it's way far ahead, you know there must be an engine there because engines can produce motion and give it to other things. Cargo cars cannot. So how does that relate to God? Well, we see that things are happening and we see that effects are causing effects are causing effects, just like one cargo car is the mover of the cargo car right next to it, right? Cargo cars can move cargo cars that they're attached to. And whenever you're looking, even though you don't see the engine on this train, what you see is cargo cars moving cargo cars. But you know cargo cars don't start the motion and they can't give the motion essentially from themselves to something else. They have to be moved. The cargo cars are moved movers. They're caused causes. But there has to be something that can move itself without being moved, or that can cause itself to move without being caused to move. That's what the engine is. So Christians, we see this and we recognize, okay, things are happening. There are effects being produced in the world. So there has to be something that can be like an engine on that train that can start this whole thing off without needing to be started itself. That's the first analogy that you can use, and I think that's a pretty powerful one. Second is black coffee. I have here some coffee. It's not black. It's got some milk in it, and it's delicious. And it's about 7:30 here where I am, so this is well needed. But The second analogy that I'd like to make is from black coffee. So imagine you have a cup of coffee sitting on the table, and you pick it up, and you take a sip, and it's bitter. Okay, well, that's exactly what you'd expect from a black cup of coffee, because that's what coffee tastes like. That's what the flavor of coffee is. It's bitter. Now imagine the same scenario. You pick up a cup of coffee, black coffee, and you take a sip, and you realize, oh my goodness, this is really sweet. Well, automatically you know that coffee is not sweet. Coffee doesn't have sweetness by itself. You know that somebody has added sugar or some sort of sweetener to the black coffee. And even though it still looks black, you can tell that's not black coffee. That's coffee with sugar in it. The reason that you can tell that there's sugar in the coffee is because everything must be accounted for either in itself or in another. So the black coffee doesn't account for its sweetness in itself, so it has to account for its sweetness in another, namely in the sugar that you put into it. It's the same thing with things that exist and things that are caused. Everything that exists either has to account for its own existence or have something else that accounts for its existence. So for me, I used to not exist. So my existence can't be essential to me, just like the coffee's sweetness can't be essential to it. There has to be something that can cause me to exist without being caused to exist. In a similar way that you can use sugar to sweeten coffee, but you don't use anything to sweeten sugar, because sugar has sweetness in it essentially. So it can give it to other things. What we say with God is God has existence in himself essentially. It's impossible for him not to exist. Since he has it essentially, he can give it to others. In the same way that if you have sugar, which has sweetness essentially, that can give sweetness to other things. Coffee can't give sweetness to other things. Nobody uses coffee as a sweetener because coffee's not sweet. So there has to be something that can cause everything to exist without itself being caused to exist. And the last analogy, which I think is kind of a fun one, I have a cousin she's a professional baker, and she always makes amazing stuff, but this is what I think of whenever I think of this analogy of God. So a cupcake shop. So imagine there is a owner of a cupcake shop, and he decides that he's going to open shop, but he just has to finish decorating his last cupcake. But the problem is he has an infinite number of cupcakes. When does the shop open? The answer is never. And the reason is because if you have to get done with your last cupcake and you always have one more cupcake, then you never are able to finish and you're never able to open shop. In the same way, there has to be some sort of ultimate cause in the universe. There's got to be some sort of first to get things moving. So this is very similar to the train analogy. So I'm going to go over two more proofs for the existence of God. That was proof by efficient cause. And the next one I want to talk about is proof by gradation. So proof by gradation, this breaks down to the idea that some things are just simply better than others. If you accept that fact, then this argument will work. If you don't think that things have intrinsic meaning and you're a nihilist, then this argument won't work and you'll have to use a different one. But this is the argument for those who accept that human beings are of more value intrinsically than a rock. Here it goes. Some things are better than others. That's the first point. Better things are better because they resemble the best thing more perfectly. So how do we know if somebody's tall? If everybody in the universe were 7 feet tall, we would have no way, that person wouldn't be tall. If everybody in the universe were 7 feet tall, that wouldn't be tall anymore. If everybody in the universe were 4'8", that wouldn't be short anymore. So how do we know what tall is and what short is? We know by comparing the height of a person to the extreme. So I am 6'3" tall about. So most people would say that I am a tall guy. But that's because I'm being compared to sort of the average height in America, which I think is 5'9" for a man and 5'4" 6'5" for a woman, if I remember correctly. But compared to that, I'm tall. If I were to be in the NBA, I'm about the same height as Steph Curry. And Steph Curry is certainly not tall by NBA standards. He is in the 15th percentile or something like that. He's quite short by NBA standards. But he's tall compared to regular standards. So how are we making those claims? We're comparing an individual to the extreme. So in order for us to actually say that one thing is better than another, it just is better than another, it's simply better than another, you have to compare these two items, these two things that you're comparing, you have to compare them to the extreme. So how do I know a human being is better than an ant? Well, I can look at the two, and I can say a human being better resembles the highest good than an ant. Therefore, a human being is better than an ant. And that's the argument. And if you don't accept that there's somebody, some intelligent being, something that can set the scale of goodness, if you don't accept that, then you can't say that an ant is better than a human or a human is better than an ant. In order for you to make those claims, and in order for you to rank things in goodness, there has to be a best being. And that is what Christians and Catholics and Jews and Muslims call God, whatever that best being is. I'm not trying to prove what God is, I'm just trying to prove that God is at this point. And the third argument, I think that this one is really compelling because I have a degree in biology, and you study a lot of chemistry when you're going through biology. And all of my chemistry professors, I don't think that they were Christian, Catholic, maybe some of them, but I didn't know, I'm not sure. But they always would do something that I found curious. They would always personify electrons and protons and atoms. And I always thought that was interesting. They would say things like the electrons want to be with the protons, or this atom or this molecule wants to be with it. And I'd think to myself, they're bits of matter. They can't want anything. They don't have desires. But clearly, they're behaving as if they did. So this is a proof from governance. It's also called intelligent design sometimes. But here's how it goes. And unintelligent things act for an end. Only an intelligent being causes unintelligent things to act for an end. Therefore, there must be an intelligent being directing unintelligent beings to their ends. So what you can think of here is an arrow in a target. If you're walking through the woods and you all of a sudden see an arrow in the center of a target and the target is set up, you don't think to yourself, oh, it must be raining targets and arrows today. What you immediately think in the woods is, oh shoot, somebody's around here and they're shooting a bow and arrow in this direction. I should watch out. Why do you think that? Well, because targets don't set themselves up. Arrows don't just fall randomly into the center of targets. So there has to be something intelligent that's causing those things to happen. And you can see this in things like the water cycle, protons and electrons. The water cycle is an incredibly intricate thing that seems to self-regulate. Water evaporates, it goes into the clouds, then it condenses and it comes down as precipitation. And there's this cyclical motion of water, which is just a hydrogen and an oxygen and two hydrogen molecules stuck together. That's all it is. It doesn't have any intelligence. So why is it behaving in this incredibly intricate way? You see that with electrons and protons, you see it all throughout nature, is unintelligent objects are following very, very well-defined rules. Where do those rules come from? The universe just wrote its own rules randomly and it just happened to work this perfectly? I don't think so. There's got to be something intelligent that can direct these unintelligent beings so that they behave the way that they do. So there you have it. There's 3 proofs for God's existence. The free bonus material that I was talking about, I will link a Google Doc in this description. And if you click on that, you'll have all of my notes. You'll have a church document that states that by reason alone, man can prove God's existence. That's a dogma in the Catholic Church. And then you'll also have a couple references there if you want to go a little deeper into these arguments. So there you have it. What do you think? Did I do a good job? Do you think that these arguments would persuade your family and friends? Let me know in the comments. God bless.